Do you ever wonder how to accelerate your growth, healing, and evolution without hard work, meditation, or spending thousands? Over my years as a conscious seeker, I've encountered one DNA activation and healing method that stands out above the rest and does just that. It's a uniquely potent evolutionary modality that helped me break out of feeling blocked and disconnected, allowing me to unfold more and more of my potential and true self, as well as deepening my spiritual connection, enhancing my energy levels, and more fully activating my body's healing mechanisms. It also remedied a major but little known energetic blockage which most people have but don't even realize. Now this convenient transformational method forms the core of my Evolve Yourself course, which has helped hundreds of spiritually awake people to accelerate their growth and evolution with minimal effort or cost. Learn everything you need to know at evolveyourself.live. All right, welcome to this episode of Truthiverse, ladies and gents. Today I have the pleasure and the privilege and the honor of being joined for a second time on the show by Michael Tsarion, who for most of you will need no introduction whatsoever. He's a phenomenal researcher and writer across a number of fields, actually. Vast scope to his work. So today we're going to focus on female psychology, and this discussion is one that am I correct that am I the only person who's invited you onto a podcast to get into this so far, Michael?
Yeah. We've shot the breeze on a couple of maybe one or two, because remember the people asked me to come on, Brandon, about the female Illuminati.
Yeah.
They say psychology, and then it veers into the female Illuminati, and they're not really. Obviously, there's slight connections, but basically they're two different subjects. So, yeah, apart from John Cooper, we haven't done a deep dive. And then a lot of sometimes, I get invitations, but they're more of the MGTOW, or they're more, sort of like, bitch hating sort of men extreme groups, and I understand what they're all about, but I don't necessarily want to be, coming from an extremist point of view.
Yeah.
I can talk to them, but they don't even get my thesis. Women are bitches is about as far as they've got, and there's no delving into anything deeper.
Yeah.
So it's hopeless. It's a message that just falls on deaf ears, actually.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully, I trust with my audience, and guys, listen up, get the listening caps on. And to finish my intro, this work stems from a book which, if memory serves me correctly, Michael published in 2019 called Dragon Mother, which is an exceptional investigation into the state of the female psyche and female psychology and all the blind spots and the stuff that nobody talks about. And then it was followed on by another excellent book called Adultism, which I highly recommend both of those. So if you haven't already read them, please do go and read them. And Michael's website, which we will remind you at the end, is dragonmother.org if you want to find these books and check out the material. So he was saying just before we started that this conversation we're going to have, this presentation, is based on a more recent article, which will be a continuation of these themes, but will be available on his website by the time this goes to air. So check that out as well, guys. dragonmother.org. So Michael, if you would like me to bring up that first slide, or just let me know how you want to go.
We can do that in a minute. Yeah, just exactly that. There's, even if you don't pick up the books, the dragonmother.net site, .org site has about 10 or 15 articles free, and this one is going to be called Dark Mother Divine. Carrying on, themes. But when I wrote those books, there has been, as you say, new thoughts. We've done stuff on Enslaved about it, teasing it out because it's a new thesis. It's quite incendiary and controversial to that degree. It's just part of a larger campaign to push back on radical feminism, especially on wokeism. So when people read this latest article, it's carrying on that tradition. We'll get to the slides in a minute, but to preview it's that the whole thing will fall apart. This project of pushing back at feminism, unless you know what their tenets are. So I started reading feminist books at like 1990, after reading a friend's BA paper on just narrative art from a female perspective. And we don't want to get into all of this, but that's when it started. And for the first time, I was introduced to feminist works that make the case that you can see art, you can see film, you can see poetry, you can see everything from a feminine point of view. And this really, really intrigued me. So then you read the great writers. There's so many of those. And then you read the refuters, like Camille Paglia, who are feminists, but so much more sane, so much more respectful to the Western tradition. Not the third, fourth wave feminism, which is very, very deconstructive of that, and very hateful of that. So you just plow through it all. And what I wanted to do on this interview, thanks to you, is to then isolate just a few. There's 9 criticisms, and we'll go to those on the slides in a minute. But then there are, 2 to 3 extraordinary misgivings that you find, misrepresentations, and just faux pas that you find within the feminist narrative that are so obviously erroneous that it's hard to believe that they would base their whole attack on mankind based on these things. But they get away with it because, one, they're quite academic, they're quite intellectually, they're graded, they occupy high positions. And there was a spate since the 1960s where the whole world was listening to what they had to say. They had the bull by the horns, and the publishers just sucked up everything that they were writing. This is particularly in New York and American. You had your Gloria Steinems and all of that, all the different feminists. So with it came a whole torrent of information, which very few men will actually pare through and go through to see if it has any credibility. And I've done this, and I find almost nothing that they have to say has any credibility. And what we wanted to do today is to prove that point. You just can't say that. That sounds misogynist, or it sounds very antagonistic, but it's actually true. And so we just wanted to sample a couple, of things pertaining that they use to reinforce and substantiate their case against the male world. But when you go beneath the surface of these couple of points, you find out there's very little to substantiate it at all, and it's almost amazing. Now, as I said, some of this came out of the 60s, so you're dealing with quite a while. So you think that the pushback would already have happened. If somebody writes something in the 60s and it's absolute tosh, you would have expected, even feminists to say we're no longer using that, or we're not going to make this a plank of our theories, right? But they have this because it's threadbare. So you have to take what you can get. And this is one of their mistakes, because they've maintained certain planks in their ideology that are really, really weak. But then their whole premise is weak. So they end up sort of accepting what you can. Even this stuff is, it's plastic pearls from Hong Kong. It's not the real thing at all, right? So it makes the job of deconstructing feminism easier. And then other books have been written in the 80s were just as bad. And the thing to really emphasize is that when you read these kinds of books, and these are by people in high positions in academia, they unequivocally condemn men, and they unequivocally demote men in their roles and in just in significance in general. And what they're doing is that they are demoting the solar world, as I call it, in contradistinction to the lunar world, which is the reign of the mother. And there's nothing wrong with that. A terrible mother is a different kind of being, but the dragon mother is a goodly soul who's the mother, and there's a mythology connected to that, and there's a psychosocial component to the role of mothers, and the role of women, and the role of lovers, and the role of wives, right? This is what I'm doing is not a critique of that. It's a critique of a pathological schizoid type who is in a deep sense of antipathy towards reality. And they're getting traction now. They're literally holding the reins of the institutions and the organizations within reality. And to get to that position, they've had to systematically demote. It's like a war against men, a war against men's roles, against their consciousness, against that kind of thing. And also, as we'll see, a war against the masculine within themselves. Mm-hmm. This is where it gets really kind of tricky, So, yeah, I just wanted to let that be known before we go for any further. But it's an ongoing understanding. But again, it's deconstructive because I'm going to their work to show the weaknesses in their work.
Would you like me to put the first slide up?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
All right.
Why not? Yeah, thank you. Since the 60s, one of the major planks of the feminists, these are the really academic ones, the highbrow ones, and they're teaching women. They're writing their books for women. They're writing for television, all that. Is this concept that man lives in fear of women. And this is one of these utterly bogus concepts that somehow, and there's even men, believe it or not, that have written books on this concept. They've actually taken it seriously. And, we could talk for hours upon this fallacy, but in the article, I bring it up. And that article, again, is Dark Mother Divine. So this is one that one has to deconstruct, And the analogy I use is that, well, first of all, the whole thing is nonsense. Men do not fear women. The only males that might do that are these beta males. They might find them, the sort of hipster types, they might find themselves sort of daunted by strong or powerful women. Yeah, but the average alpha man who built the world, who went out with Alexander the Great, to conquer things, and right up to today, the bridge builders and the infrastructure creators don't skulk in the corners in any fear of woman. And the proof of this, so how this ever got into their works is really something to do with their own vanity and superiority. Take the woman, take the female form of the body. Do men fear it? Certainly not. They admire it. They lust after it. They desire it. They awe it. You can be in awe and wonder of the female body, as we all are. That's why the female form, is replete in art of the world, but it's also in our magazines, and it's in our fantasy, and it's in our porn and all of that. So think of that. That's the woman for most people, isn't it? The physical form of a woman. Since when do you fear it? Where's the fear? Well, it doesn't exist. It's a figment in the mind of woke feminists who have a superiority complex, and they latched onto this concept that mans fear woman. They actually don't. If anything, there's more evidence in the world that women hate men. Infinitely more evidence for that than there is for man, fearing woman. It's not to say that some don't. Well, yeah, if you've been brought up by a terrible mother as a kid, yeah, okay, you turn up on the chart as being a male who, does have a sort of a pathological fear of women, but then even then, that's justified. Just as you would have a fear of an abusive father or stepfather or uncle or things like that, then it's a rational fear. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. But for feminists to pick up a wholesale this concept of, the men are so weak and so, effeminate or whatever, that they live in the subconscious fear. Now, they got away with it. When you dig deep, as I said, you find, because you ask for proof of this, and you go to them and say, where's the proof? And you don't find it. The only two things that they can bring up is, one, that the reason why a man will fear a woman is for the same reason that he fears Mother Nature. Nature is something that is always, has a threatening side, of dangers and so on. And so the woman is these feminists have craftily conflated Mother Nature, because nature's always been, axiomatically connected with the feminine. Okay, so then, they said that man lives in fear of that. And then they use the Freudian Jungian sleight of hand to say that also the feminine is to be conflated with the unconscious. And since there's a fear of the unconscious, so then women will be feared by men. Of course, that's easy to knock down, because then why is the unconscious, which is totally neuter, why does man not represent the dangers of the unconscious that women might fear? So for women to appropriate a neuter phenomena like the unconscious, identify it with themselves, is already so hideously spurious. And then to say, because men fear the unconscious, they must fear women too, because we represent the unconscious. So slight elements of truth in there, because it is axiomatic that the psyche was the butterfly, the psyche was personified by a woman. Wisdom, right? Sophia has been, by some sects and some religious traditions, like Gnostics, identified with the feminine, but those are more poetic illusions. Any sensible person knows that when you're really talking about the divine or deity or spirit, you must attribute both masculine and feminine traits to that, to the soul. And it's only a poetic illusion that, you would call it by female names, because same thing with Mother Nature. But nobody's going to take that absolutely seriously. But these feminists did. And talking to women, hoping that women will read their books, they try to instigate and instill and insinuate this idea of superiority. And then when it's taken to its furthest extreme, they're saying that man even fears the unconscious. Well, the unconscious can be feared as much by women as it is by men. Most of Freud's clients were women. Right? Women are far more neurotic in life than men are. So that one falls apart. You see, so this idea of the fear of woman, because she represents nature, which is untrue anyway, and and also represents in physical form the powers of the unconscious. It sounds all good on paper, but it really doesn't have much credence. So yeah, if you have question there, we can please jump in. But unless, we certainly can go on to the next one as well.
Yeah, no worries. Just before we do, maybe in case this comes up again, which it probably will, the terrible mother. Could you just maybe clarify what the terrible mother is for people?
Yeah, this is the more schizoid controlling mother. You get the controlling male and you get the controlling woman. But what has happened is a mythology has grown up in our world, and a kind of penchant to never point the finger at, you wouldn't be politically correct. So this is a tyrannical entity who is emotionally very, very broken and mutilated, who, because they can breed, they do so. And they bring up, they're basically tyrants, but what happens is, where we can often accept a male tyrant, and we can identify that form, and we can even penalize it. Often the terrible mother goes a whole life without ever being confronted, because there's obviously something that's a barrier in our consciousness that just can't see. And even when it's quite clearly that this is a horrific person, they die in silken sheets and live a very, very happy life to that extent, pushing people around. And so it's a deep, deep crime to be brought up by one of these people. And then the second crime is not just what they did to you, it's that you have this cognitive block to ever really formulate proper rebuttal, dare push back on these people. And that's what we see now socially. It's not just on the individual level. Unfortunately, socially, here is basically a criminal, an emotional criminal and a physical criminal that has never been confronted. And only when you turn to the great psychologists, Melanie Klein, Alice Miller, Karen Horney, and others like that, do you find the tools that you'll need across the way. You get Heinz Kohut, you get R.D. Lang, and you get Jacques Lacan. What I'm talking about is well known in psychology, that you have these pathological types. And it is a terrible, terrible, see, because the energy of the terrible mother in her toxic relationship with her offspring is the actual root of all pathology.
That's profound. Yeah, let's pull on that thread.
Well, the next thing to say about it is that now that you see skyrocketing records of pharmaceuticals, Pfizer and Eli Lilly, right? They offer these products for depression, suicide, neurosis. Yeah, but who's buying them? Nobody's forcing you to buy any of this Haldol or whatever else they're sticking in your Prozac or whatever it is. Yet it's $1 billion, almost $1 trillion business. Right. So I've been asking from the beginning of my career, who's lining up at Walgreens, or whatever, or wherever, to take it, at Boots, mothers are bringing their children. That's a whole separate subject, by the way, but just forget about that. The human race, the statistics are out the door about how many people need these products. They need it because there's certain psychological syndromes that they're not facing, obviously. And this is one of them. The terrible mother is a phenomena that when you really get into it, like I've done, then you find out that relationship is the root of all pathology. But if you have a cognitive dissonance and you don't realize that, then all the drugs in the world are not going to help you. And all the so-called psychotherapy that also doesn't want to deal with mother is useless. So that's why we have more skyrocketing rates. And this affects women too. This is not any misogynist statement, because women, one of the manifestations of a deep, all of the pathology in girls, women, is matriphobia. What it's also I deal with in this work, in Dragon Mother and Adultism, is matriphobia, fear or hatred of the mother. And that is cognitively blocked as well. Girls are filled with this as they grow through their lives and into the teens. They've been violated so awfully by their mother, and many times even on a psychic level. So and then you block it. Same with boys, right? It's called the Oedipal complex. When you break it down, is really this conflict between son and mother. And Jung rightly called it Electra complex. And that's misunderstood even by Jungians. Electra complex is nothing more than matrophobia, which is, again, the conflict that ensues between a girl and a boy. If you have to split hairs, we just say Oedipal stages, and that should be enough. But Jung rightly said, well, Freud lumped things in a little bit too much. There are differences between the girl's experience of motherhood and the boy's experience of motherhood, and we want to go through that, and deconstruct it and just make it more clear. And all I'm doing is carrying on that tradition, but focusing much more on the girl's relationship with mother in this phenomenon known as matriphobia. And so all the other articles, deal with that, and so does this new one as well. These are incredible phenomena, but because they're blocked, and because we're not dealing directly with the source of pathology, this horrendous schizoid, emotionally mutilated creature, don't you see then that it leaves us open to these monsters? Monsters are created in our world. Leviathans of evil are created because we're not because of this taboo. If you can break the taboo and people then break through the political correctness, can look at woman and the criminal history of womankind, because there's a social aspect to this as well. Mothers didn't just exist in the 20th century. We're dealing with, a whole tradition of pathological women as well. So if you can look at that with the same kind of openness and bravery that women easily can demonize men, and the whole world just bows and scrapes and accepts it, man needs to also then look at the phenomena of the female psyche without any kind of hesitation. Then I absolutely know that will deal with this other Leviathan. The way to destroy these bloody Leviathans of total evil is to not take their product. But how do you not take their product? Is to resolve issues within your psyche and yourself in another means. That's what psychology was for. That's what psychoanalysis is for. And just because a lot of people have, consider it taboo to look at the mother-child relationship, no, the time has come. Absolutely, the time has come for us to start looking at it, regardless of how controversial it is. And it's really fascinating. It was just a study that I get into that fascinated me, as I say, from 89, 90. I've never thought of it as being something controversial. It's just another interesting, fascinating subject that needs to be explored.
Yep. Let's continue the exploration. I'll bring up the next slide if you like.
Yeah, and one of the other we could cover this at length, but we won't. Is this extraordinary phenomenon that you find in books as going back to the 60s of the deconstruction, unwarranted deconstruction of the central pillars of Carl Jung's theory. And Jung was very close to women. His own wife, Emma, was a trained psychologist and used to, really, make sure he was on the straight when it came to his analysis of women. And his mistress, Toni Wolff, a very famous character who was a trained psychologist, a brilliant analyst, and she was a mistress of Carl Jung. And these women made sure, and we're not, and those are only two. There was plenty of others at that time, and they made sure that he didn't get away with no nonsense. And yet, strangely, as soon as we get this second, the sort of third and fourth wave of feminism, they're coming after Jung's central thesis. And to give a little preview of what that is that it's called countersexuality. Or contrasexual, whatever you want to use. And that is that the soul of males is feminine and the souls of women is masculine. Now remember, the feminist tries to mix this up. Their sleight of hand, their footprint of criminality is that they conflate feminine with female and masculine with male. Wrong. Masculine and feminine are typologies. Male and female are genders. And anyone who tries to over-identify the two is already doing sleight of hand. Because by Jung's already statement, a male has a feminine side. Mm-hmm. And the woman has a masculine side. So anybody who tries to dodge that is already, Actually, it's a very common mistake. A lot of people make it. But usually it's a benign mistake and you don't run after it. But in feminism, you must watch because they're not making a mistake. They're doing it on purpose. So... But the point we want to get to is that what did feminists do with this? Because this is accepted, and thousands upon thousands of sessions and therapeutic sessions has been confirmed by hosts of Jungians, both men and women. It's accepted. Okay, they came along, these feminists, especially these woke ones in the 80s. But as I say, this has already been done in the 60s, amazingly, and that is that they started to refute the idea that the soul of a woman is masculine. Now, why anybody? Well, we know why they do it, right? They're trying to eat away in order to, it's all done in the name of female superiority, actually, right? So what you do is you say, well, no, there is an animus. Animus is the Latin word for the male, that's in a woman. They go, there is animus, of course, but animus is sort of like a servant, some sort of like, glorified bellboy in our minds. And all the animus does is hold a big torch to illuminate the woman's soul. So the soul of a woman is not masculine, it's feminine, right? Completely undermining what Jung had said. But yes, that feminine soul lies in darkness. So obviously we need the torch holder to come and show us what's already in our lap. Think of the high priestess card, right? In the tarot. But although that light is needed, it's only illuminating what woman already has in her spirit. It's not bringing her anything. And you go, well, yeah, okay, maybe I could work with that. But what they're really saying is that this extraordinary, so there's no masculine soul in the woman. The animus only comes in as this sort of illuminator of my soul. So in other words, women cannot see their own soul. Women cannot see their opportunities, any gifts that they may have, and certainly are not in touch with their own holiness without the animus. They concede that. But once the animus has illuminated these skills and this holiness and illuminates the female soul, the job is done. You can bugger off now. And, again, we see this demotion of the masculine. They never tell you the opposite in a man, that his soul is not feminine. That's never even touched on in these books. It's only in the woman that the animus is demoted. But the woman, the male, is not. They don't say, oh, yes, and by the way, Jung was wrong about you guys too. Your souls are not feminine. Of course they are. The feminine is supreme. About this time, you can start to smell a rat, right? Yeah, so the male soul is definitely still feminine, but the woman is feminine. And the attribution of the masculine animus to the woman, they're denying. Well, I've got to tell you something, that's schizoid. And it will actually lead to physical pathology, because you can't unseat the masculine in this way. And of course, we know what followed. By unseating the masculine within themselves and demoting it to merely some sort of servant in consciousness, the role of the male outside has also, from exactly the same time, the 60s, been demoted. So if Jung was still alive, he'd look at this in horror. And he'd say, oh my God, what are you psychos doing? You are demoting the masculine within yourselves, which is tantamount to complete regression and meltdown and worse. And coinciding with this, you've worked politically and socially to demote the role of the male. What is going on here? He would conflate these two. And of course, what is going on there is so deadly. And the whole idea to do this to Jung's work is a sign that these people, these woke feminists, are absolutely lunatic, right? That's a sign of it.
It's really sad. It's sad because Jung, like you said, he was surrounded by a coterie of brilliant women. He was by no means any form of misogynist. He was a man of massive insight, and also most feminists probably don't even know that I think it was a number of years before he died. I don't know the date now, but there was a time when the Catholic Church decided to they brought in Mary Magdalene as like the fourth holy aspect. So it was no longer just the Trinity. It was like this quaternity now. And Jung was delighted at this because he saw it as, acknowledging the feminine part of the psyche and bringing it back into the fray and kind of becoming whole again. And he was actually really pleased with that process, that we weren't sort of repressing and denying the feminine anymore. And so it's pretty grotesque what you're describing the feminists are doing with his work at this point.
I had completely forgotten about that. That's right. Well said. He was at the Council of Trujillo. It might have been the 6th century. People have to look that up. But at the Council of Trujillo, the feminine principle, which is Sophic, in the broadest esoteric sense, is the Sophic principle. He absolutely relished that, as he did many things. And even on an intellectual basis, it is absolutely astounding that he himself could come up with the anima theory. You just can't trash that stuff out the back door because some demented feminist is telling you to do so and scribble some rubbish down. What? This is like one of the most profound, and it doesn't even intuitively make sense. Obviously the people who did pick up on this and maybe did listen to these feminists, they have to be screwy to do that. It's so unwarranted that, as I say, we could talk for ages just about that one thing. But if you go to the next slide,
cool.
There's something that also needs to be brought out, exactly concomitant to this. not only did they demote the animus, which is what used to be, you know, a description of the soul of woman, not only that was that trashed and shredded, but they actually then went on to say, equally preposterously, oh, and by the way, you guys, if anyone in the world does see some terrible aspects of woman, and we were talking about here about the terrible mother, so that's all exonerated now. That's all airbrushed. If a mother turns out to be one of these terrible mothers that you talk about, if a businesswoman, you know, like Dallas and Dynasty of the 80s, turns out to be one of these horrors, bossing everybody about, or in any other way that you see female evil, you do realize, of course, that it's because we embody, sadly, the animus. Well, hold on. Where did you get this one? Right. So not only is the animus demoted as being the soul of woman, she's displaced that to say, no, the soul of woman is fully feminine, all right, which breaks the contrasexual dynamic. But now that you've contained this animus, that is the force that makes a woman into a bitch. That's the force that makes her misuse her children and her husband. And that's, if you find it even in the corporate world. See, when the great power women, queens and princesses of the world ruled any state, it has now been discovered that it was 26 to 30% more war, more conflict, and more meltdown.
Wow.
Stuff I've been saying for years is now confirmed. So anytime that you would see this, these Eleanor of Aquitaines or, you know, Catherine the Greats or whoever it might have been, look, and now they're trying to tell you to exonerate themselves. No, it's the masculine in me. Of course, then what does that mean? That which is feminine is absolutely holy. And that the woman has been colonized inside herself by this masculine. So in one breath, they're using the masculine energy to break through the ceiling and take hold of, you know, and to be ambitious and competitive and successful. It seems to be okay in one breath, but in the next breath, you're saying anytime that you see an evil, a Condoleezza Rice, you know, bombing the hell out of somebody, that's not me. So look at the wires that are crossed here. Look at the screwball action. In one breath, feminists are telling us that you need to be independent, individuated, differentiated, and free. All of that takes animus. But no, the animus is the source also then of any evil that you could ever lay at the door of a woman. So I don't know what to tell you. You can't even follow, you know, the nonsense. So what this all amounts to, though, is the wholesale demonization of the masculine and the male. Since they've conflated the two, then the demonization of one is obviously the demonization of the other. But the whole thing is sophomore from a psychological point of view. And yet so many Jungians are women, but the women who are Jungians are not bringing this up. They're negligent. They, above all people, should know that what we're talking about is the fact. Yeah. But they, for somehow, are silent, like so many others in our world, you know. So this is terribly biased, terribly unwarranted, and can only, you know, there's several reasons why this is that these types who just live in universities all their life, you know, and jump through hoops, they're kind of urbanized, right? And so some of their thinking is already demented, as it is in many men, because of this urbanization, that you can get this kind of, you know, I look at it as a very urbanized way. If women were still, you know, in the countryside, if they were really lovers of nature, probably that would stop them coming up with these absolutely insane ideas. You know, just their own instincts wouldn't allow them to come up with this nonsense.
Yeah, the domestication process has kind of warped the psyche a little bit.
Yeah, and the strange thing too is that this does no justice to women. When these books are written, as I say, and then other women, goodly women, might be reading this drivel, this is then, you know, terrible. It infects because there's nobody there to tell them it's wrong. You see these people with PhDs that come from Princeton, Harvard, wherever, Columbia, you know, all this. So innocently, you might go to a bookstore, pick up a book like this, read it and go, oh my God, of course, because, you know, a lot of it sounds good on paper and it seems substantiated. But have you read the collected works of Jung to find out? Have you read the collected works of, you know, Freud? Would you be able to sit down and go, no, this doesn't sound quite true? And also you break your own rules all the time. The way you treat your own children shows that you know, you're not consistent. In other words, you very much use the male and masculine energy to situate yourself in the world, in the urban world, but you have this doctrine that's written in books and is written in very high academic papers that the male power is something much lower. You gain from it in almost every way, and yet you abjure it. And then, of course, we haven't even talked yet about projections. How the idea of, you know, the feminist is very focused on the idea of projection. a woman must reject or resist the projections, the evil projections of males, and vice versa. Don't project don't embody those projections is their big thing, and also maybe cease projecting yourself on the males. And of course, this is yet another spurious idea, which leads straight to pathology and straight to schizoid typology. You'd ask what on earth is going on, but you understand it when you realize that the people espousing these ridiculous ideas are themselves constitutional moral inferiors. They may have high IQs and all of that, but believe you me, on a psychological level, they're very, very low degree. They're people of very low degree, and so they've misused their power in order to change the status quo and absolutely destroy what we know about identity. And something, one has to push back at that at all costs. It's vital that one does. You see, it's now been discovered, one last point on this, is that their ploy that the masculine energy is the source of aggression and anger can seem to be true, except that new findings now are finding out that estrogen, right, intake of estrogen in foods and drinks is also one of the causes of violence in men. So there's even science, now we don't want to waste time pursuing this, but there's a new theory that it's estrogen, the female hormone, that actually causes the aggression. So, this premise that I was telling you, we're talking about, is very, very weak. I don't look at it too much from the physical point of view. I'm always focusing on the psychological, but there is even physical evidence now that there's a different cause of this intense violence. And again, I think in the article I go into this more, but yeah, okay, let's move on to the next one. I think we've covered that. Okay, now this one again is more related to my own sort of work on this subject, but I think it's so important we had to talk about it, and that is atavism. It's an odd word, and it has many meanings. There's no doubt about that it's not just one meaning. But in this context, atavism is anything that is part of the ancestral programming, and no understanding of women, no understanding of their psyche, and no understanding of their criminal history is possible without this. This is how, when you start undertaking this investigation into the subject, you come across some of these very, very bizarre things. And of course, anything that is atavistic is working on the subliminal level. That means that women who may be acting atavistically aren't aware of it. And this is where the bridge to the female Illuminati thesis is stronger, because when my critiques of how the media, especially through women's magazines and any kind of commercials or anything directed toward women, that's what they're doing. And it is very subtle, and I've tracked it. People know, through Unslaved and all my work, I'm tracking this phenomenon of the modern media age, and that is that they are constantly stimulating atavistic instincts and impulses in the limbic realm of the woman. The woman has no idea what's happening. And so when you see these large changes, like the arrival of feminism and other traits of feminism, because remember, first wave feminism was not anti-male. So then how did it later become that? Right. So any larger movements like that often is that you're operating as a somnambulist. And men go through this as well, but it's more deadly with the woman because it's epidemic. It's been funded now in the tune of billions of dollars. So again, an atavistic life is when certain patterns that are not holistic, not wholesome, and ultimately very destructive to the woman are being stimulated by this Dionysian cult, which the feminists are out in front, but you'd be amazed at what's behind it, right? And they have the knowledge of how to stimulate ancestral hatreds. Now, this would take us, into hours and hours of work to talk about what is that hatred. And very brief, it is the fact that in ancient times, and the dates are really hard to pin down here, but you could pick the 8th century BC. You could pick the rise of patriarchy. Patriarchy did not just arise all on its own for no reason. So whatever dates women give, and the feminist writers are always giving you dates about the Aryan invasions and the rise of the patriarchs that destroyed the matriarchs. Well, whatever dates they are, whether it's Paleolithic, Neolithic, and later periods, we'll have to leave that in abatement. The idea is that for centuries of time, women lied about paternity. and this is accepted by the top scholars and anthropologists, women lied about the origin of children. And to cut a long story short, and in doing so, they exalted themselves to the nines. Because, of course, when the fathers did not know that it was through insemination and mating that a child is born 9 months later, and this is amazing to people. I think people have a great difficulty grasping this. And rebutters will say, well, sure, they must have known through the animals. No, because animals give birth within days and weeks, not 9 months. I mean, it's so simple to answer that. It wasn't completely obvious. And the only way that it was slightly obvious is when your offspring looked like you. So women covered for that by saying that they looked not like you, but like the ancestors, your grandfathers. Yeah, well, still, how did they get born? Through the divine agency, through immaculate conception. And don't you know we're goddesses? What's wrong with you people? The angels did it. Immaculate conception, or a sacred animal, or there was a sacred part of the calendar, a beam of light. Remember Mary and the angel Gabriel? Oh, that's right. And so that's an instance of what we're talking about. So women perpetuated this lie of paternity for centuries. But to move the story along, finally, because there's a lot to that story, finally men started to realize, no, it's a lie. When the lie was busted, you get an extreme resentment from womankind. And that's one of these atavistic elements we're talking about. Because when the lie was discovered, women were not contrite. Women were not interested in losing their divinity, all falsely gained, by the way. Their exaltation of women in the mythologies and in the histories is largely a matter of deception. It's called the criminal history of womankind. Right? But the thing is that when the males caught on to this is how you get civilization. Cosmopolitan areas, walled cities are designed exactly because women now were under surveillance. So when men were away, the women couldn't play. Okay, so there's a lot to this, a lot. But women themselves were not particularly contrite, and they wanted their power back. Rather than being contrite, they resented men for discovering the lie, and then thought to themselves, one day we'll get this back. And that is the definition of an atavistic resentment, coupled with a promise that's in the DNA of woman to regain this exalted power, which aligns them with the gods. They had got it because giving childbirth isn't a remarkable thing after all. And so men and societies and cultures were willing to exalt women to the gods just because they have this ability, which is to give birth. Yeah, I can see that. That's something pretty profound if you wanted to take that up. But that led to an immoral action, which then, was discovered. The discovery changed what we know about man and made them, and is the origin of the patriarchy. So all these modern feminists who scream bloody murder about patriarchy, they caused it. This is when you get into the real history, not the history they want you to know. Patriarchy got created, love it or hate it, out of this, as men changed their, realizing that they've been suckered, right? Developed these priesthoods, developed a much more robust masculinity, all that came to oppress women. But women have skewed the story so you don't get what really happened, and it's about to happen again. Women are just setting themselves up for exactly the same thing that happened in ancient times. This feminism is the most deadly thing for women. But getting back to the story, the resentment that built up and the secret promise that we will have our power again. Now, do you understand in the world that you see where this all came from? Women are now again superior, and they're moving in droves to regain this power, but it's atavistic. And the media has been the one that took goodly women who had no such mode, weren't in such a desire to affront men. Like I said, even first wave feminism wasn't based on that. But through the media, working on the limbic, awakening atavism, this is a huge part of the narrative that we're talking about. And it gives them the traction and supports my thesis that this is taking place. Very, very important to factor this in. If you don't factor it in, the whole thing, you never get anything what I'm talking about. Factor it in, and you're on your way to massive revelations about what's going on. And then it's not that you're blaming women; it's that this is an atavistic. Women are the ones who need to say, "Oh my God, I wake up from the spell, from the worm tonguing, that the media has awakening something to destroy our world." This is an attack on Western civilization. It's an attack on Western European man, and women are the doomsday weapon. And it'll never stop until they themselves take responsibility and say, no, I'm not for this. I'm countering this. I know that I'm being stimulated and hypnotized and mesmerized, and dirty things are being awakened in my consciousness, and I'm not going to let it happen. And I'm not going to teach it to my kids. And I'm not going to buy these stinking magazines and hand them to my daughter going, isn't that marvelous? And then watching them become bulimic and anemic and, anorexic and all the rest of it. And man-hating. The damage that's being done. So this atavism has to be, brought up. It's a target. It's not, these feminists don't love women. They want to get at men. And they'll use any woman. They don't care what happens to that woman, that they become obese, that they become whatever, deranged. They're being used as doomsday weapons. And the sooner that ordinary good women realize this, the better.
Absolutely.
But they won divine status, and they want it again. So that can be awakened at any time in a woman. And sadly, it is being awakened, and it's very hard to stop, because it calls a sense of responsibility to a woman, that it is a challenge, which is why most women are not bothered with it. It's a real challenge. Look what we're talking about here. It would be a gigantic effort on their part to withstand this sorcery. It's no easy task, but obviously. Now, here's the irony of ironies. I apologize, because you would need to know about Jungianism to get this, but I'll try to make it as clear as possible. And that is that as all these feminists meant to advocate for the feminine principle, and in Jungianism, that's the anima. But irony of ironies, paradox of paradoxes, all these bizarre ideas that the feminist has in her head are actually generated by the anima to bring about their own destruction. And I say in the article, I offer more proofs than we can do now on this, right? But it's like a paradox. You see, and it's all done in the name of divine justice. That's why that article is called Dark Mother Divine. When you demote the animus, which, as I've just explained, they have done, don't they realize that all the archetypes are a counsel? Don't they realize the axiomatic fact that the psyche is compensatory? And what that means in practical terms is you mess with any one of the archetypes and the others come to its aid. So the demotion that's been done to the animus, women's demotion of the animus within them, as I've described, that they've shifted it, demoted it to a page boy or some sort of bellboy. Don't you see the havoc that creates archetypally within? Does Jung have to explain this to you? I mean, he would be frightened. He would be horrified if he saw this. What has actually happened is that when you mess with any of the archetypes, the shadow, the anima, the animus, other archetypes are compensatory, right? It's like you kill a woman's husband and she guns up. She suits up to go and seek revenge. So the feminist is being led to destruction by the very feminine principle that they think that they exalt. I don't know if you can think of a greater paradox and irony, but to say a few bit more words about it, it is to do with this imbalance. Now, in extreme cases, because it's in the name of justice and homeostasis, but in extreme cases, the anima is a trickster and can bring about total destruction. I talk about this in a series I've got on Enslaved called Women in the Unconscious, in which I introduce this concept called daemonic archetypes. And all that means, it's just a fancy word for saying that the archetypes return, but not in any kind of healthy, holistic mode to help you evolve, because they see that you don't want to evolve. Your conscious setting, your conscious comportment clearly shows that you're not interested in any healthy evolution or holiness. Right, great. So on the other side of the unconscious, the archetypes respond in kind. They become demon. They instead of meeting angels, in other words, instead of meeting the archetypes in an angelic and goodly form, you'll meet them in their demonic form. And this is what's been happening now, through the generations. And the anima is like the leading one, the leading trickster. All of the archetypes have trickster capacities. All of them. Animus can mess with your mind as well, but the anima is the genius of it, because she is the one who is in charge of any image-making faculty in your mind. And I go into this in the article. All that, for instance, projections. Remember that stuff about projections? Projections are images. I have an image of my mother or my grandmother, and I'm going to project that on any woman I meet. That's a projection. And if I have a bad image, that'll get projected. If I have a goodly one, it'll be projected. Projections are nothing but images. But who asks, where do they come from? Who creates them? The archetypes create them. So the images are being sent into the heads. There's a deeper magic. Dark Mother Divine doesn't like having her counterpart fucked with. All right? She sends images into the minds of these lunatic woke feminists that hypnotize. One of them is the hermaphrodite. This is one of the images. And this is the image that haunts their minds, which is why you get this LGBTQ and homosexual, rise and all of that epidemically. Because there's an image being sent into the heads that leads these women down this, into the sorcery. But they are trying to celebrate the divine feminine. They don't realize that that's already turned dark because of what they've done, that these are very unwholesome people. So that's just one example. There's many images that come into their heads. The idea that man must be demoted is an image in their heads because they've already denounced and done something to create imbalance within. Now, as Jung would have warned them, as any sane person would warn them, you're in a state of imbalance. And from that comes pathology, comes schizoidness, comes psychosis, comes neurosis and derangement. This thing is actually quite extraordinary when you get into it. So woe betide the women who claim to be psychologically astute, to know something about Jung, and yet what they've done is so anti-Jung, anti-psychological, by inflating the feminine in the way that I described and demoting the masculine. They create a state of psychic apartheid. But the natural order, which the moral universe and your archetypes represent homeostasis, they won't allow that. You've just waved a red flag saying to Mother Nature, come and get me, and she does. So the women today who fall for this leftist wokeism, and all of it, are in a state of total meltdown emotionally. You want to get real out of the way quick because something's coming down here. Their ego structures are incredibly fragile, and they're also very, very inflated.
And I find it also might seem trivial, but this would seem to tie in. If you look at a lot of the current woke kind of feminist types, a lot of them have done their level best to try to look like men. They more and more they look like men. It's like they're trying to impersonate or pretend, even when they're not lesbians. They're still, some of them are they're shaving their heads and all this sort of stuff. Do you must see that as tying into this sort of archetypal imbalance in the dynamics there?
Yes, there's even this funny meme that goes around showing second, third, and fourth wave feminine. They have a picture of women on the right side, and they're not even looking the same. And this is exactly right. See, so the whole thing of feminism is spurious. The whole thing is based in this inner archetypal loss of masculinity. It's an aberration. How it came on is a big history, how it moves is a history. But because they're so imbalanced as people, and why do you think I mentioned matriphobia? It's not open-ended. Somebody goes, "Oh, you need to say more about that, Michael." Well, I already have. The feminist is a person who is a victim of matriphobia, but they won't face it. And the person who doesn't face the terrible mother in her life or the matriphobia which is the syndrome that they're carrying around, the article explains that this person is more inclined to take medication. This person is more likely to be deranged, hateful, and also more likely to join a crowd because they're schizoid. And the schizoid eagerly runs to the crowd, for reasons we might be able to talk about as we go through these other points here, these errors. But yeah, never forget that the compensation is what's happening here. There's a need to overinflate. So once you've inflated the feminine principle, automatically, as Jung would have told you, you can't inflate one part of the mind. In fact, this is as old as Aristotle. It's called the doctrine of the mean. You can't take one proclivity that you have and over-exalt it without creating some sort of deep imbalance, just to make it simple, in your psyche. You'll keel over, you'll tilt over, and you won't be able to see reality aright, and your relationship with yourself is also marred. One of the things, back to the question about terrible mother, is she is the one, being the mother, who facilitates the images that her child, right, realizes in their mind. So in youth, images of man, of woman, and most importantly, of self. This is Jacques Lacan, the French psychologist, came in, where the very self-image that the child has of itself is sent back to it by a counter projection from the mother. It's almost like the child projects onto the mother its own identity, expecting that identity to be held in trust and then slowly projected back over the infant period, so there's a stabilizing action. There is this reciprocal action, by the way, that a lot of people don't even realize is taking place. Even the mother may not understand that this is taking place, that she is a soul holder, a soul bearer of her child. But the terrible mother does not project that back, reproject it back in a healthy way. So the child is receiving, says Lacan, not the true self, its authentic self. It's receiving who the mother wants him to be or expects him to be. And that is the root of pathology. Because the child now has a true self that is suppressed and has to conform to this counterfeit self projected back by the mother. And this then, several stages later, by about the age of 7, you develop what's known as the superego, which has the horrible task of trying to glue. It's got to find some welding equipment to weld these two together. Neither one, the superego has no way of remedying it properly. It just goes, no, the only way I can think right now to hold you together is to stitch you up like Frankenstein. The counterfeit image remains because your mother has controlled your mind and your being and your behavior for all these years, so it's not going anywhere. But there's this quiet little still voice in there that's the real you trying to get out. So this Frankensteinian monster is created, with mechanisms, false mechanisms that aren't ultimately helpful to you, need to take birth in your psyche to make sense of this patchwork quilt. And that's called the superego, which is ultimately not your friend. But you need it just to even, it's like putting your fingers in the dam. It's just give me whatever tool I'll use. There's a puncture here. So all children are born like this, and the ones of the terrible mother have this extra level of conflict within their minds, and that is then the root of later neurosis and pathology. But I did say that the mother is also facilitative of all the images in your mind, and that includes the images of masculine and feminine men and women. That's why it's the root of pathology. I mean, it's bad enough to have your own self-image completely warped and distorted by the terrible mother, but the other images that you're going to carry into teenage life and then later into adulthood of how you see the men and the women are also equally distorted. Now do we understand? But it doesn't end there, because that person who's in that neurotic state goes to the Pfizers, goes to these monstrous Modernas, goes to the doctor, goes to the psychiatrist, goes, there's something wrong with me, help. And then they hand you products that got all these female symbols on it. The etymologies, seraphim. Now that's just, when I've been doing that since the beginning of my career, trying to show people the colorings of these pills. They're pink, they're blue, they're baby colors. So nice. They'll help you too. They're the happy pill. Don't you get it? And even the names, we don't even get into all of that. Let's go to the next slide. I mean, I've gone tired talking to people about that.
Here we go.
So
First
the
error,
conflation.
conflating female and feminine.
Yeah, good. Thanks for going back to that. That one is simple. We've already alluded to it, that this is spurious. Only in normal conversation can you do that, as just a colloquial conversation where masculine and feminine and male and female can be used in the same language, non-technically. But to try and conflate them for a purpose like this, a disingenuous purpose, I do consider an error, and it's done disingenuously all the way down the line, really. Remember, masculine and feminine are typologies. Male and female are gender. So try to observe it in yourself when you make that mistake. It'll help that when you're listening to these kooks, you'll see that they are making that mistake quite frequently, Yeah, we can go to the next one.
Do you want me to read that?
Yeah, could you? Okay.
Cool. Denigrating the roles and significance of physical men, and follow up by exercising the masculine from their being, the second error.
Yeah, we've said this one already now. So these were summaries of it. So the top feminists toyed with this idea back in the 60s. That really didn't work, because no Jungian or any other psychologist is really going to accept this. The demotion of the masculine within yourself, and this attempt to move the furniture around and demote, it's clearly seen as an inflation of the feminine. Their demotion of the masculine is clearly seen as a device for, to bolster feminine superiority, female superiority, and that's why it hasn't got an ounce of. And people really backed off of it because they could see that this was just going to create even more gender conflict. So it kind of fell into the background, and then they just settled then for the more political, constant demonization of men. And even behind concepts like equity. Some of the things that are happening today, the political correctness, equity would be one, are cover terms for this equalization. But let's just move on and go to the next one.
All right. Third error is ignoring possible and plausible solutions to their own questions about why women have been oppressed.
See, this is the heart of my work, is that, look, there are other reasons, and we just discussed them. You remember that atavistic stuff? If you see that you're being oppressed, why are you so close to the umpteen other explanations for it? Well, because of course, why would the criminal want you to know about what we talked about? Their lie of paternity, the discovery of the lie, the following resentment, and then down to it magnified by all women through history, right? The atavistic. They're not looking at that. They're also not looking at matriphobia. But go to the next one.
Fourth error, zero interest in the criminal history of womankind.
Now, that is a totally legitimate study. So if you're introducing this to people for the first time, you go, it's just like studying, botany or anthropology or other kinds of, subjects, studying the lifestyles of Paleolithic humanity, whatever. So this is not in any taboo. It's not controversial. It's just another study. It's actually a very fascinating one because we're all born of woman. Don't you want to study your origins? Don't you want to accept that there's pathological aspects to it? Don't you want to accept that there's criminal behavior to be laid at the door? Or that, well, let's put it this way. If man has fear, as we addressed earlier, and if man oppresses woman, why are women so loath to look at that it is because women posed an actual danger in the past? What is, to me, see, I've never understood why that would be a taboo subject. If you're on the trail of a criminal, then you're on the trail of a criminal. You've got to do the forensics. You've got to say, if there was a threat, if there was a legitimate danger, that can answer why the rise of patriarchy even better than all of the spurious nonsense they come up with. That man just of his own is a brute. That the Aryan horse riders who just took it on themselves one day to come and kill all the gynocracies and all the matriarchies. That just happened because man is a rapist at heart. Man is just a dirty, scuzzy thing that has been at war with us ever since. As time goes by, that is becoming less and less valid. There's even women out there who've written on the lie of matriarchy. Cynthia Eller. So it doesn't have the traction it used to have. But this, what I'm talking about, is true and does have the traction, and is much more rational. But it is only sane and rational women that will ever, want to take up this investigation. What was the next one there?
Okay, the fifth error is convinced that men have had it easy throughout history. Feminists make outrageous claims for rights and opportunities that are not extended to the rest of humanity.
Yeah, basically it's female superiority. Don't be fooled by their denigration of men and all of that. It's all for us, none for them. It's all for us, none for you. And the strange thing is, it's not even for the good of women. Because if you really sketch it out, like I did in the article, you'll see that everything that these feminists are proclaiming and purveying is actually going to bring a blowback of such utter proportions that it will do ordinary women no good. This entitlement.
And the sixth error is conceiving themselves infinitely superior because of their childbearing capacity.
See, that is, they claim to be, in all of their literature, haters of stereotypes. Don't stereotype the woman. But yet they do it constantly to men. So there's another double standard. Yes, the woman, rightly, in many ways, has been deified or seen to be exalted because this childbearing gift has been given to them. And then what they do is they extend that, Brendan. What they will then do is they try to exalt the feminine principle. Yes, women give birth, but the man gives the seed. And then, as I say in the article, this also then branches open into a bigger metaphysical, mythopoeic chicanery that's going on. Because, just take a metaphor of the Egyptian myth, but you get it elsewhere as well. There's the primordial waters in which just nothing's happening. It's the creation in its most abyssal and basal and foundational form. But the feminists themselves say and know that the primal feminine abyss, in whatever way it's configured by whatever psychologist, especially Erich Neumann and Carl Jung and others, Edward Edinger, or it's configured in actual mythology, it is the sleep. It's the place of the unconscious. You don't know anything about it, so it has no essential beinghood. So when they take this feminine principle and make it primary, they're making a fundamental mistake that is, has tremendous recoil in their own faces. By trying to exalt the feminine, by saying woman is a child bearer, and then the next thing that they say is that then the feminine is the primordial womb from which all life comes, all consciousness. That is in fact an error, even though it's physically true. It is physically true, technically true that women give birth. It is technically true that all life came from this primordial waters of the goddess Nun or the primal abyss. But you come to know that fact because of something that happened within that abyss, and that is the stirring of the ego germ, or the little shoot that rises up from that abyss vertically to come to consciousness, right? And that is the masculine principle, the dot in the circle. You only know that there's a circle, you only know that there's life because you are aware. But you only become aware because of the masculine movement. If I drop something into a glass of water, you get that little thing popping up. The water forms into a phallic pillar, and you get a little dot. Right, that stirring is the masculine, and the uroboric pleroma below it is technically first, but it is not superior. So the very essence of feminism, which states that the feminine abyss is primary and superior, is false. They shouldn't have picked this up because it's actually wrong. You climb to consciousness and awareness and then look back. This extraordinary, the ithiphallic movement toward the light in the solar world allows you to turn back and surveil the origins of which you come. So the very idea that there's a feminine principle is only deducible, only manifests as a phenomena because of the masculine. Well, that means, or can be argued, right, that the masculine is in fact superior. So, and it's up to everybody to make up the decision. A sane person says they're both important, but the feminist is not sane. The feminist is not saying that, and they're not interested in this kind of dynamic that we're talking about.
The seventh error is the project will fail. Women are not about to relinquish the many benefits received from the misuse of beauty and sexuality. Acts of second attention bring in more benefits than equality.
This one we could talk about endlessly, but we won't. It's just an axiomatic fact that a great many, especially in women who have no morals, it is a fact that women have already gained infinite amount of goodies from the misuse or the abuse of their beauty and their sexuality. But in the context of what we're talking about, it gets worse, because beauty and sexuality are endowments from nature. The woman herself is not willfully in control of her beauty or her sexuality. These are endowments. See, in my other work, I point out something that runs alongside this. Women, especially these antagonistic, aggravated feminist types, hate man for his masculinity, his brawn, his endurance, and his strength. This is going back millennia, this hatred. It's one of the atavistic things I forgot to mention earlier. We can mention it now. Instead of admiring it, goodly women admire men with those traits. Other women, the toxic women, right, envy it. And they wish they had it. They wish they had those powers. But nature has ordained that you don't. So when you hate men for what nature has endowed them with, it's the same thing as hating nature. So where this idea came from that women are all natural and into the natural order and they represent it, like we said earlier, is a fallacy. Here's another proof that that's not true. Because if you were of nature, you'd honor men for the traits and the endowments that they have. And over here, you get the same thing. And again, a lot of their calls for equality is to cover this up. Second attention is the method. It's just a word for the method by which women seduce men. They may not sleep with them, but it's that idea that I hate men, but the first time I get a puncture, any old Eve and Geezer at 80, it's like if you watch the movie Bronco Billy with Clint Eastwood. So second attention is the method by which women interact with you normally, but there's a second attention of eroticism running below, and it's amoral. And just because it's ancient and has been done so many times doesn't make it any more moral. So the moral woman does not envy men, she admires them, and never abuses sexuality or beauty. And even in any case, those things are endowments. They don't come from your will. So they're from nature as well. Very, very important points to think about.
The eighth error is total denial of the problem of matriphobia.
Yeah, how many times can we say it? And of course, this then is back to the terrible mother. If you have a goodly mother, you're not going to have any high levels of matriphobia. You may have certain things you dislike about your mother, like you maybe do about your father, but it's not going to create a syndrome that's going to unearth your consciousness. And hopefully your mother has been goodly and knows something about this, about the programming, about how images work and projections work, and just doesn't disaffect your consciousness. But the terrible mother does. So matriphobia, I've many articles on this on the dragonmother.org site. If it's new to people, it is the chief syndrome that affects the mother-daughter relationship. So when you see these teenage girls choosing to go with thugs and criminals, jailbirds, lining up to have babies with serial killers and all the rest of the fucking shit they're into, right? It all comes back to this. you're sending signals back to mother, or in some way, you've been warped by that woman's horrendous influence in your life. And it's epidemic right now. So the trouble, though, is that women evade it. They'll take the medication, they'll go towards a debauched life, they'll become woke or whatever you see them doing today to evade this phenomena. What I'm simply asking is, don't evade it, and all this other nonsense will, you won't spend 5 seconds with it, and it will radically change. See, it's almost like they are turning to easy prey. Hate your father, envy the male, or hate the male. There's an underlying, phenomena, which is this dynamic between the daughter and her mother. In evading that, the simplest way is to join the thugocracy and to, embody these ideas that demonize men. And as I said, that doesn't lead anywhere ultimately. And also to do so means that you'll then have, on an archetypal level, woe betide you to affront the anima. You don't want this. Trickster is a mild word. And right now, when you see this nonsense going on, I see the anima at work. The very force they think they're building altars to is just shredding their minds. It's really horrendous to watch. And so it's one of the reasons I've been motivated to do this work. But I think that first one has to understand that the archetypes are compensatory and they can operate in a daemonic way. This is already an unusual concept that a lot of Jungians have never expressed. But it's actually very simple. Anything that you beat too many times, anything that you kick a dog too many times, is going to snap at you. It's going to return in an antagonistic form. And feminism is merely the socio-political manifestation of the archetypal upset and the return of the archetypes in a completely, much more antithetical and ultimately destructive mode. So this is, a message that goes out. Let's go to the next one.
The ninth era is awakening and succumbing to atavistic energies and images which lead to destruction. They possess individuals and groups.
Yeah. Summarizing what we said before about the media's role here, that there's very powerful forces behind this, that women in general, goodly women, non-goodly women, there's something going on within their DNA, so to speak, that's being awoken by people who know everything that I've just said. Everything that has happened in the ancient past that's still written in the psyche. I've said from the beginning of my career, you see, that they, meaning the elite, the controllers, the puppet masters, the architects of control, know everything about your psyche. Now we get a chance to even show more depth about that. You don't know about your past. The history books have lied, and we're not aware of the configuration of what makes the unconscious. Why is the unconscious even the unconscious? Things we could get into. So the atavism is the memory banks, the deep, deep memory, and advertisements and commercials and films. And slowly they've been working on women. Slowly they've been working on women to get them to where they are right now, to be thoroughly antagonistic. So that's another facet of this, that once you go to war with this, then you'll realize where the poison is coming from. This is being stimulated every day by $1 billion industry. They don't care how many people are destroyed, how many people go towards the pharmaceutical companies to alleviate the very, because it's weakness, isn't it? You're saying, I can't face looking at my existential issues, or my parents. That's taboo. So I'd rather kill myself from these medications. It's crazy. But another facet to that last part is, and again, it's the screwy stuff. If you exalt the feminine, as in the way I've been describing that they do, well, doesn't man have a feminine side? So if women today, these little woke snowflakes or whatever, harden themselves, or lesbians or whoever, like I said, everything can be understood today about, these gender fluidity and all of that from what we're talking about. If you harden against a male, you're a woman and you've grown up, you go through school, and you basically are cold and you're hard towards a man's feminine side, which is, I need nurture, I need comfort, I need you to look after me, and I need love, and I need sex. The more that women harden toward that and say, no, we're not going to take your projections, we're not going to yield, isn't that an affront to the feminine side of the man? Well, that's the topsy-turvy world we're living in. Here are people who exalt the feminine and forget that the man, all men, even a brutish man, has a feminine side, as mutilated as it may be. But a lot of men have a very healthy feminine side. It's not mutilated. Hey, girls, the moment that you say, I'm not servicing you, that is another affront toward nature. And the woman who's taken that to its extreme becomes a lesbian. That's why lesbianism is on the rise. It's not genetic. It's those people, those women who say, no, I'm not servicing a man, but I still have personal needs. I have a feminine side that needs to be succored. I have a feminine side that needs to be comforted. Okay, I turn to girls. What does the man do? He becomes homosexual. He goes, well, the girls aren't helping. The girls aren't yielding to me. It's terrible. And by the teenage years, they've worked this out and go, well, I guess I have to turn to men, and I'll come up with some claptrap to say it's DNA, it's genetics. No, it isn't. Psychology. The man turns to man for any kind of comfort for his feminine side. There's a whole argument where, whether that's even going to lead anywhere. But I'm just dealing with the phenomena as it is. The turning from the feminine side of the man has caused all these aberrations. Then to cover it, they try to talk to you about nonsense, about genetic predispositions and all the rest. What any idiot can tell is total nonsense. It is not. You're not born gay. It's matriphobia, mate. But it happens so early, and you've got so many cognitive blocks into that dynamic that you would rather jump over childhood, which is what everybody do, jump over the Oedipal conflicts, jump over the matriphobia, and say, oh, no, I'm born like that. No, you're not. No, you're not. This is sociological. This is rooted in everything that we're talking about here.
It's almost like, the decision gets made at a point in time where it's buried. It just ends up buried in the subconscious. And then, years down the track, they're like, oh, well, this is just how I am. And they don't actually, there's no memory of the process of like the conditioning or the trauma that prompted them to move in that direction in the first place.
That's it. They don't even deal with it. Okay. And that is it. Yeah, see, the homosexual is the one who's signing off from what we said. The feminine side of man is not normally nurtured by the opposite sex. So immediately, without even knowing it, you could predict it from an armchair. Oh, that means that women will turn to women. That's right, that did happen. And men might even turn to men. Yes, that happened. Well, it's one-to-one.
You made a lot of sorry, go finish that thought.
But the key to what we're saying is that the woman is doing something wrong because she claims, the woke feminist is claiming to love and adore the feminine, except if it comes to being the other polarity within a man. What kind of nonsense do they believe? Why can't they see their own hypocrisy in this matter?
In Dragon Mother,
the mystery of homosexuality is solved in this regard, as far as I'm concerned. Needn't plague anybody anymore. But these are just a couple of points. There are additional issues, but those 9 I thought were concrete enough to say a newbie came in. I think they could mull over these. But this last one is very revelatory, very revelatory, because in the turning away from the feminine side of a male, when women do this, when they harden against them as they've been taught and programmed, how is that their adoration of the feminine? Their own. At that moment, from the first point we start talking to the last, you can deconstruct feminism. There's not much left. There's really not much left once you do it this way.
There's definitely not a lot that's logical or doesn't have double standards, as you've pointed out. And you made a lot of really interesting observations in Dragon Mother. You're talking about sexual orientation and stuff, and the different ways that a girl would respond to the influence of the terrible mother. And in some ways they might it was one of them, and I might bastardize this a bit, but one example was the lesbian who turns in that direction as a way of not repeating what her mother inflicted on the husband or something along those lines. Do you remember that kind of? Because there are some interesting different angles on why someone ends up being gay in this way or that way.
All of the typology comes about from this. Remember the 6 types: the masculine male, the feminine male, the feminine feminine, and the masculine feminine. The masculine female is the goodly one. She goes on to be a dragon mother. She admires what men do. There's no antagonism, and she doesn't misuse sexuality or beauty. That's the higher type. The masculine male, he's also a higher type. He gets on with being an alpha. He builds the solar world for the benefit of himself and the masculine woman. The feminine female and the feminine male, they're problematic, and then there's another creature called the chivalric male, who, although he appears on the surface to be one of these masculine men, he's far from that. So I had to delineate that type as well. So yeah, but in simpler terms, you're either going to identify with the power wielded by this Medusan mother. See, Freud's error was to think that the male, the father, is the castrator, that whole dynamic, and that the boy child falls in love erotically with his mother. His secretary, Otto Rank, wrote a book called The Trauma of Birth, and came up with some different theories about that. And it precipitated a break between him and Freud. He'd been secretary for Freud for 22 years. It caused a shitstorm. But in his theories, he's either showing you that Freud already knew you're either going to identify with the object of your hatred, or you're going to try to be somebody different. So when it is understood that the boy's so-called Oedipal connections with his mother is to cover his absolute hate of her, this was confirmed later on by Melanie Klein. So let me explain it again. There are erotic moments, that form in your mind of a boy in relation to his mother, but those are purely compensatory. Under hypnosis and in deep therapy, you find out that that is to cover, it's like marzipan covering the deep, deep, deep hatred and fear. There's an element of fear here as well. But remember, we talked about that fear of woman is ultimately spurious. But if you can find it, it's here temporarily. But it's not fear. Fear, it's hatred, wrath, resentment, or again, more than fear. So again, fear doesn't really come into it at all, although it is there, obviously, as part of this horrific cocktail. So Rank discovered in his therapies that the boy is not afraid of the father as castrator at all. He's afraid of the mother, because she is also the castrated one. When he sees her naked, or he sees Nanny naked in those days, she lacks the male genital. It is thought then, so Freud thought that the child works out that the mother has been penalized by the father for some terrible crime, and that's how she doesn't have the genitals. That's what he thought. And father gets the blame for wielding the great scimitar, the great sword. Actually, it turned out later that this is not the case, and that in the deepest mind, in the deepest subconscious, all the children, the girl and the boy, know the mother is the wielder of the scimitar. And to make a long story then short, this is where you get the girl identifying with that power, or the boy identifying with the power. So it always devolves to the mother's power, not the father's power. And by the way, if he happens to turn out, as most men are, very weak anyway, this is only far more exacerbated. If you have a strong masculine father, it's actually a help, because then he represents, in the world that his friends, his colleagues, his world, his solar world, represents a necessary haven from the Stygian abyss and the smothering of the mother, which is all encompassing. This is more of the terrible mother, so I get into all of these dynamics in the book, because at the semiotic level, this is pre-Oedipal, the mother has complete dominion over the minds of both boy and girl. This is where the images come from, and the influence is enormous. Remember that thing about also sending back the image to the child? It's at the semiotic level that this is all occurring. Also, it does so continually, but this is where it really hits. This is where great damage can be done. And the rest of the Oedipal stages up to 7 years old are an attempt to rectify, if there's been some real heavy-duty abuses, psychologically, then there's 7 more years to work it out. But if the mother maintains control, it doesn't get worked out, and then you're just a mess. And then you're going to have teenage, you're going to have delinquency in adolescence, tics galore, like I said, criminal behavior. Everything we know about children right up to teenage years is sourced in this. So the father's world is seen as a haven, actually. So when the feminists demonize the father's world, don't you see what they're trying to do? They're trying to dismantle the only refuge that healthy children have to escape the Stygian abyss of the smother mother, of the terrible mother. If the feminists succeed in making that world so horrific, they're actually making it a shadow of the lunar world. They're bringing the solar world back into the lunar level. That's the end of civilization, and a lot more besides. And the way men are turning out right now, every day I see it. See it in the streets. They're winning. These soy boys, these hipsters, these millennials. They're not men. So this drag factor of the maelstrom, sucking masculinity down, is actually working with the media's help, with politicians' help. And something has to happen. Something has to be pushed back against this. But again, back to the point, you either identify with the object of your hatred. What a phenomenon. Isn't it enough to study that? It's so fascinating. Or you will healthily say, no, I register what I hate, and I don't want to be like that. I want to be anything but that. And then you more healthily move towards the solar world in a heroic way, and you seek for other imagos to embody. Hopefully some people in your family, but if not, you can go on and seek heroes in other areas, in books and so on like that. but then you'll escape most of this. So those 6 types are an attempt either to identify with the terrible mother and her extremely power, her great power, her big club, so to speak, or you will try to get the hell away. So these feminists then are the ones who haven't made it. They identify with the power wielded by the Medusa, and this is pathological. That's not going to lead anywhere healthy. It's because it means self-murder for yourself to identify with the object of your hatred, which means you're not facing the hatred. Then you're going to be what kind of a person? You're going to be a psychological freaking mess. Both as Reich would have said, your body armoring, and way more pathologies than that. You'll be a totally neurotic. Absolutely, you'll be a schizoid person. And the schizoid person then is well known to psychologists, and a lot of things can be now said. So I end my article by reinforcing this fact that they're schizoid, and then giving a little description of what it is to be a schizoid type. And we go into that description so that then when you meet one of these people, you're armored with a lot of information intellectually about them, and you can predict their behavior, and you'll not be so affected by that pathological type. They won't be able to win you over with some of the drivel that they've got their narrative. They can sway you if you don't know if you don't know your stuff.
And it's really interesting. There's so many tangents that come off of this theme, but you did comment in the book on the way that some people, in response to this, the traumatizing by the terrible mother, you talked a lot about the crowd and crowd psychology, and they'll go and join the crowd. But I found it interesting. You also mentioned the religious personality as well, who uses the religion as sort of a surrogate womb, so that maybe that's a thread that we could pull on. I just thought that was a really interesting thought.
Yeah, it is very important. As the superego gets created, you're either going to have a very feminine man, or you're going to have the masculine man. The masculine man obviously is more rational, more logical, wants evidence, and moves towards the solar world. And it's not that he's free of pathology, right? But if you understand what we've just said about the solar world being one of its hallmarks is as refuge from this regressive swamp, then obviously even our world will sometimes be over masculinized. War, soldiering, right? The man goes towards the gung-ho, 6-pack, and so then the feminist has a certain right to critique that. I'm glad we got to this, because yes, there are elements of that are aberrant. What I'm doing is showing you the roots of how it came to be. So the ultra sort of hyper masculine side is over competitive, is ludicrous. And so if a woman critiques it, hey, I'm with you. I'm not like anti-feminist on that level. If your critiques are logical and they're saying this over masculinizing, but at least I want them then to also, critique its etiology, bring it back to the terrible mother. That's the part missing from that level of psychology. Then you've got the other polarity. This is to answer your question about where religion comes in. The softer feminine guy whose roots are actually very weak. He needs to he's also trying to escape the feminine abyss in his deeper core, because being male, even though as feminized as he is, there's this great struggle. So for him, religion then, mysticism in that theological sense, a God up in the sky is the thing to identify, is the thing to cleave to and identify with. And they often turn towards Roman Catholicism because they have the feminine in there as well, right? Mm-hmm. Mother Mary imagery works for that type. And one can get into a lot of information about that polarity. So, and I do so in the book to show that the religious mentality is looking for succor. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to enter into the solar world, but bring elements of the feminine with them. That's how you get your Mother Mary cults and Lady of Guadalupe and all of that soft stuff. That's how you get the New Age movement, right? So it's still it's an attempt to stay within the solar world, but to soften the light a bit. Whereas the gung-ho masculine male, if he's in his more negative mode, he is just totally, utterly burned out solar. He's like full-on halogen, which is not good either, because that's an aberration as well. But more that would be the chivalric man. He's the more messed up. So that is why women prefer eunuchs, gay guys, queers, right? All of that, because those guys are highly feminized. And as we said, all of them have the secret agreement to not really nurture the feminine side of a normal male. This is where it all breaks down. That's how they get there to be defined. And look how many rainbow colors they've broken into, LGBTQ. Each one of them can be defined by this one thing I've just said. I am not going to service you, man. I'm not servicing your feminine side. But all of them then breach the very ideology they have, which is to exalt the feminine side. What a mess. You see, and geez, it's not going to stop here. This is just the teething. Just wait to see what happens. And then, as I said, one of the images that's thrown up in the warped mind that the anima sends you, this is a screecher, is the hermaphrodite, the androgyne. So all these LGBTQ types are trying to approximate an image that the anima, the one they think they serve, this is how cocked up they are, right? There's no psychologist going to fix this. Jung squared will never fix what we're talking about here, because this image is being sent by a daemonic anima that's going to take you fucking down. And see, once you irritate the archetypes, it's all over. Culturally and individually, you're a fucked. You can't fight that force. She's the dark mother divine, and you are in the shit. So she sends you this image of the androgyne, and in trying to, it's like that three men with the elephant. In order to try and discover how do I manifest this, you get your LGBTQs and the whole homosexual gay way thing as an attempt to manifest androgyny. But that's a false image sent to you by a very, very interesting force that you better not fuck with.
Yeah, it's extremely interesting. It's very interesting.
It's like this. You think you're worshiping her, but she's after your ass. She's coming after you. She's the bow girl.
Yeah.
You're going to be in serious fucking trouble when you feel that arrow going through your third eye, mate.
It's what you're saying makes a lot of sense if you look at the way that these people are, the imbalance, and the way that they really are possessed, like literally possessed by this archetypal force. And so they think they've got one agenda at a conscious level. They're trying to do X, Y, Z, but really they're actually possessed. They're now vehicles or vessels for this force that has its own completely different agenda.
Yeah. It's why they say the things they do, like that stuff about the primordial abyss. They superiorize it. It's definitely there, and it was first. I'll grant you it was first. But for you to try and take that and then conflate it with superiority, when obviously these are the highest academics in the land, they can't even read Jung or Erich Neumann. That stone, and then whatever stirs that phallic thing to ithi-phallic movement that brings you to awareness and consciousness as a lucid being that then can turn and analyze your roots. That is the superior one, if anything is. But they've done this inversion. Why do they do it? Because they've been possessed by the anima who's sending them these lunatic ideas, and they just become possessed by it. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I really don't. It's so, but all I know is it's extraordinary. It's a mystery that puts you on your knees, to the archetypes, how they respond, how she serves justice. Yeah, this is although that destruction is a service of justice. It's very Shivite, but it's written into the very bones of the earth. It's written into the cosmos. It's part of the moral universe, and expect your archetypes to serve that force. Your conscious disposition, well, you're free to do whatever evils you want, and we have, but don't expect the moral universe to sign on for it. And the archetypes are nothing but agents of the moral universe, and we have affronted it in ways that are inconceivable. And our urban environments are that example in concrete, and then the lunatic ideas of the urbanized person, also show such, I call it mysteria. And we're coming to the point now where there's going to be definite blowback, from that cosmic order.
Yeah, it's you've elucidated it very, very, very well. And yeah, I mean, I know we could pull on other threads, and we could go for hours and days because you know this stuff inside out. But was there anything? I'm just trying to think of anything that we should touch on or questions that I wanted to ask. But I think you've spoken most things. Was there any other? Yeah, go ahead.
Only to say that things are going to get worse until remember, it's one of these dynamics archetypally that things do have to get worse. It's the nature of deconstruction. To take the false idea to its extreme. William Blake said that the fool who persists in his folly becomes wise. He's saying something very wise there, because this can even happen socially. That the whole of society needs to go toward the edge. This mass formation psychosis. We have to live it out so that we know intimately that it's not the right way. There's no shortcuts here. A quick band-aid. Oh, we moved down the wrong path. Turn around, guys. You can't. This is an army. You just can't turn that tank around. The road is completely one way. How can you turn all the tanks around, and all the army? We went down the wrong road. You've got to completely bring them all, to the destination. Then you will never take that road again. So there's many laws and rules in here. But yeah, I'm really proud of this work. You're one of the first people, if not the first, to even ask me to talk about this, the female psychology, in a more concrete way, outside of what we've done on Enslaved and so on. So it's been a big thrill to do this. I'm proud of the article. There's a lot of good articles on there. It could be put into another book, but I'm resisting that. I think the two books that you mentioned, Adultism and Dragon Mother, are more than enough. And then there should be some free material for the website for people who are completely new to this, and who might get into a big sweat and, think it's all anti-woman or whatever. It's anti a kind of woman, but it's done holistically so that the greater woman comes out of this.
Mm-hmm.
These are all of this work is basically a helpful manual to the goodly woman, the masculine woman, who's seeing that her sisters are bringing the world to perdition and themselves to ruin. Might need, a couple of pointers or whatever to pick this up. I don't know why it needed to be me. I got plenty of other things to do than this, but I got interested back in '89 in female psychology. I've been working on it ever since. Never got a chance to ever bring it to any of the work. It just needed to mature on its own all these years, and I never really even thought we'll get there. But because of members and other things that hastened the process, finally I was able to get the thesis off the shelf, and it's been going really, really well, getting a lot of great feedback. But again, personal thanks, Brendan, for you, and Amy setting this up. It's a great, great indicator, and a very, good, feels inspiring that the message can get out there actually.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, just it's such an important message. It's obviously such a huge deficit, in the collective awareness, that we need to. It's like, you have these people who compensate for the collective blind spots, and this is one sterling example of where you are one of those compensators for that blind spot. So yeah, that's why it has to be you having this chat and doing the presentations and writing the books about it. And I'm glad you did, man. And it's been a really interesting discussion. And I found the book, particularly Dragon Mother, because there's so much in it. It's a much longer book than Adultism. There were so many great insights in there, and so many dots that were connected, that I was like halfway to connecting in some cases, but you'd already done it. And it's like, man, this is juicy. This is really juicy, and it's something I recommend. These are two books I really strongly recommend people check out, and read the article Dragon Mother Divine at dragonmother.org, and check out the other materials there. And yeah, hopefully there will be another book down the track when you're ready.
You never know. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, man, thank you for taking the time to have a chat about it anyway. It's
a pleasure, Brandon. Thank you so much.
If you want more cutting-edge research and insight like this, there's something coming that you should know about. I'm building a dedicated and intimate container called the Truthiversity for free minds that love knowledge. To reserve your early bird membership before we launch, head to truthiversity.com.